What if everything you thought you knew about the world was actually holding you back?
We are schooled to collect facts, to stack beliefs like bricks, to build a house of knowledge that promises shelter. Yet often that house becomes a prison, rooms of certainty where the light cannot enter, corridors of habit where the heart forgets how to wander. Learning, as we practice it, tends to be additive, acquire, accumulate, assert. Unlearning is subtractive. It asks us to remove the mortar between the bricks so that the walls might breathe again. Consider how a child sees a tree for the first time, not as a category, but as a mystery, green, reaching, alive in a way that resists naming. Over time, the child is taught taxonomy, utility, metaphor. The tree becomes a concept. There is usefulness in concepts. They are tools that save us from reinventing perception every morning. But when the tool becomes the measure of reality, we mistake the map for the territory. The art of unlearning is the discipline of returning to the tree without the map, of letting the senses re-encounter what the mind has already labeled. Unlearning is not ignorance. It is a deliberate humility, a willingness to loosen the grip of comfortable explanations. It is the practice of noticing how certain ideas have colonized our attention, beliefs about who we are, what is possible, what must be feared. These inherited certainties shape our perception like tinted glass. Through them, the world appears in predetermined hues. To unlearn is to remove the tint and discover the raw colors beneath, to allow surprise to re-enter the room. There is a psychological economy to this process. Our minds economize energy by relying on patterns. Habits are efficient, but efficiency can calcify into blindness. Depth psychology teaches that much of our life is governed by unseen assumptions, stories we tell ourselves about worth, safety, and belonging. These stories are not neutral. They direct our attention, our choices, our capacity for intimacy. Unlearning invites us to interrogate those narratives, to notice the small, persistent beliefs that steer us like a hidden rudder. Metaphor helps here. Imagine a river whose course has been dammed by accumulated debris of opinion and fear. The water still flows, but its movement is constrained, its music muffled. Unlearning is the slow work of clearing the dam, removing logs of prejudice, stones of certainty, so that the river can find new channels and sing new songs. It is patient work. It requires both courage and tenderness. We must be willing to be disoriented, to lose the familiar landmarks that once guided us. There is also a spiritual dimension. Many contemplative traditions speak of a beginner's mind, an openness that receives each moment as if for the first time. This is not naivete, but a cultivated receptivity that refuses to let past knowledge dictate present seeing. In that space, insight arises not as accumulation, but as revelation, a sudden rearrangement of perception that makes the ordinary luminous. To unlearn is to practice this beginner's mind in the face of our own expertise. And yet, unlearning is not merely inward. It reshapes how we relate to others and to the world. When we release rigid certainties, we become less defensive, more curious. Conversations cease to be battlegrounds and become laboratories of discovery. The world, freed from our preconceptions, offers itself with a generosity that had been obscured by our insistence on being right. So the first step is simple and difficult. Notice what you already know and ask whether it serves life or constrains it. Name the beliefs that feel automatic. Sit with them as if they were old garments, comfortable, familiar, perhaps moth-eaten, and imagine laying them aside. What remains when the garments are removed is not emptiness, but a body ready to feel anew. If we begin to clear the dam, what new channels might the river carve? What songs might return to the banks? This question opens a doorway into a deeper inquiry about the nature of perception itself, and it is there that we will continue, into the subtle mechanics of how unlearning reshapes attention, intuition, and the very architecture of knowing. If we begin to clear the dam, what new channels might the river carve? The image of water finding its way returns us to the subtle mechanics of perception, how attention is shaped, how habit sediments into certainty, and how the act of unlearning rearranges the very architecture of knowing. Unlearning is not a single gesture, but a slow reconfiguration of the senses, a retraining of the mind's habitual reflexes so that surprise can again be received as a teacher rather than an intruder. Perception is not a passive mirror, it is an active sculptor. The mind chisels the world into forms according to the tools it has been given: language, doctrine, memory, fear, desire. These tools are useful, but they also leave marks. Over time, the marks become grooves, and the grooves become the default pathways of attention. To unlearn is to notice the grooves and to practice stepping out of them, to allow the foot to find new ground. This is not an act of negation alone. It is an invitation to curiosity, a reorientation toward the rawness of experience before it is smoothed by explanation. There is a paradox here. The more we know, the more we can be blind. Expertise can become a lens that narrows rather than clarifies. A surgeon's practiced hand may miss the small tremor that signals a different diagnosis. A philosopher's elegant theory may occlude a simple truth that resists systematization. Unlearning asks for a humility that recognizes the limits of frameworks. It asks for a willingness to let a theory fall silent so that the phenomenon it sought to explain can speak for itself. This process has a bodily dimension. Beliefs are not only thoughts, they are held in posture, in breath, in the way the chest tightens at certain ideas and relaxes at others. The body remembers before the mind does. Thus, unlearning often begins with the body's small rebellions, a sudden discomfort in a conversation, a tightening at the mention of a familiar story, a reluctance that feels like a truth. Attending to these somatic cues is a form of inner intelligence, an embodied discernment that precedes conceptual judgment. When we honor these signals, we allow the body to become a guide out of the old maps. Language complicates and enriches the task. Words are both bridges and cages. They allow us to share insight, but they also fossilize it. A phrase that once opened a door can, through repetition, become a lock. Poets and mystics have long used paradox, negation, and silence to loosen language's grip, to point beyond the sign to the thing signified. Unlearning, then, includes learning how to use language less as a final statement and more as a provisional gesture, an arrow that points toward a horizon rather than a wall that declares the horizon closed. There is also an ethical dimension. Many of our certainties are not merely private habits, but social inheritances, beliefs about others, about worth, about who deserves compassion. Unlearning in this register is a moral practice. It loosens the hold of prejudice. It opens the possibility of seeing another person without the filter of stereotype. It is a slow dismantling of the narratives that justify separation and a cultivation of attention that recognizes the shared ground beneath apparent difference. Unlearning is not a one-time revolution, but a lifelong apprenticeship to uncertainty. It requires patience because the mind prefers the comfort of known answers. It requires courage because letting go can feel like loss. And it requires tenderness because the beliefs we shed often protected us in some season of life. To unlearn is to honor the past without being imprisoned by it. As the river clears, new sounds emerge, small eddies, the chatter of stones, the sudden bright flash of fish. These are the subtle revelations that arrive when the mind unclenches. They are not grand pronouncements, but quiet clarities that change the way one moves through the world. If unlearning opens a path, what then becomes possible to see? What small luminous truths have been waiting behind the dam of our certainties, patient as seeds in winter, ready to unfurl when the light returns? As the river clears and the small luminous truths begin to speak, we arrive at a quieter threshold, the place where unlearning becomes not merely a method, but a way of life. The stones that once muffled the current now glint. The water remembers how to sing. This remembering is not a return to innocence, but a deepening of sight, a seeing that carries the scars of experience without letting them dictate the shape of what is possible. The work of unlearning has loosened the old maps. Now a new cartography emerges, drawn by attention that has been humbled and widened. There is a peculiar gravity to this stage. When certainty falls away, the world does not collapse into chaos. It reveals a different order, one that is less tidy but more alive. Patterns that once seemed fixed begin to breathe. A belief that felt like a wall becomes a doorway. The mind, relieved of its need to defend old positions, discovers a spaciousness where nuance can live. This spaciousness is not an absence of thought, but a richer field in which thought can move like wind across an open plain, touching, shaping, then passing on without clinging. Imagine perception as a lantern carried through a dark forest. When the lantern is small and rigid, it throws a narrow beam, and everything outside that beam is shadowed and suspect. As the lantern grows, through unlearning, through the patient loosening of assumptions, the light widens. Trees that were once silhouettes reveal their bark, their knots, the tiny life that clings to them. The forest does not change, our relation to it does. We begin to notice the subtle music of leaves, the way light falls differently on moss, the small economies of shade and sun. These are the discoveries that unlearning invites, not grand revelations, but intimate clarities that alter how we move. There is also a moral tenderness that arises. When we stop insisting on being right, we become available to the other. The act of unlearning softens the edges of judgment and opens the possibility of compassion. Prejudices, like old garments, lose their warmth when we set them aside. In their absence, we feel the rawness of shared vulnerability. This is not sentimental, it is structural. The architecture of relationship shifts when we no longer approach others as problems to be solved by our certainties, but as mysteries to be met with curiosity. The inner life, too, rearranges. Freed from the tyranny of fixed narratives, memory becomes less a script and more a resource. Past wounds remain, but they no longer monopolize the present. The self, relieved of the need to defend a story, can rest in a quieter identity, one that is less a fortress and more a home with open windows. In that home, silence is not an absence, but a presence. It is the ground from which new insight grows. The sacred, which often arrives as a softening rather than a spectacle, finds room to be recognized. And yet, unlearning is not a final state. It is a practice, a continual clearing of the riverbed so that new currents may form. Each season brings fresh sediment. Each encounter deposits new assumptions. The discipline is to return again and again to the work of noticing, of naming what has calcified, and of letting it go with gratitude for the service it once rendered. This is the paradox. We honor what we unlearn by thanking it and then releasing it, acknowledging that every belief was once a shelter and that shelters must sometimes be left behind. As we close this arc, from the house of certainty to the cleared river, from the dam to the song, there is a final image to hold, a hand opening in the sunlight, palm up, not empty but receptive. In that openness, the world arrives without being filtered through old lenses. Colors are truer, sounds more precise, and the small miracles of ordinary life regain their capacity to astonish. If unlearning is an art, its masterpiece is this simple posture of readiness, a life that sees without needing to possess, that listens without needing to answer, that loves without needing to prove itself. Let the river carry you, not away from who you are, but toward the fuller presence of what you might become when the maps are loosened and the heart remembers how to look.